The Force is not very strong with the Star Wars sequel trilogy.
That's not how the Force works.
Alright, but the Star Wars sequel trilogy is an absolute mess. That's not to say that they're all bad films, in fact one of them's in my top 3, but as a cohesive 3-part story, it's messier than a freshest night out.
Jedi's weapon deserves more respect.
Oh, sod off, will ya? But as some eagle-eyed viewers may have noticed, this video isn't about Star Wars. I'd like to keep things largely positive on this channel, and if you want to check out my views on the saga, you can check out my Star Wars Defined video. No. Alright mate, your loss. But anyway, you're not here to throw yourself into the Sarlacc pit of Star Wars opinions. You're here for something way less clickable. So I just have a few questions for you. Do you love great films with themes that are richly explored? Can 3 totally separate films function as a coherent trilogy? And of course...
Do you want to lick it?
Sorry?
My cornetto, do you want to lick it?
Ah, the Cornetto Trilogy. Britain's best export since... No, definitely not.
Pedophile!
Alright, knobheads and nonsense aside, nothing quite captures what it means to be the average Briton in the 21st century quite like the Cornetto Trilogy. It's not that magical, it's not that metropolitan, it's just mundane.
That is harsh.
But before we dive right in, we have to talk about what makes a good trilogy. Because 3 great films does not a great trilogy make. As soul-enriching as watching Lilo and Stitch, How to Train Your Dragon and Paddington back-to-back would be, they don't exactly tell a single coherent narrative or thematic story.
You don't have to be a detective to work that out.
And despite Kathleen Kennedy's best efforts, you can't just throw 3 tangentially connected films together and expect it to make a satisfying trilogy.
What a cunt.
So what made the Cornetto Trilogy so special? Well, for starters, there was action, there was comedy, there was heartbreak, there was horror.
And of course, there was drinking.
But what Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg as writer, director and writer respectively achieved...
Don't be daft, Steve. It was written by Jesus.
Fine. What Jesus has managed to achieve is crafting 3 films that work perfectly on their own and arguably even better as a 3-part story. And I must say, I adore these films.
Alright, gay.
While Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz and The World's End all have their own themes, and their own genres for God's sake, on the surface they appear to have little to do with one another.
There is always something going on. You have to look closer.
And when you do look closer, the Cornetto Trilogy is all about childhood, getting older, and a refusal to grow up. And each film builds on that theme and narrative in totally organic ways to make what might not be the perfect trilogy, but most certainly a perfect trilogy.
How's that for a slice of fried gold?
So let's look at that, shall we?
I don't really know what to say.
Yes. Yes, thank you.
Shaun of the Dead is all about the titular Shaun, his girlfriend's desire for him to grow up, and his lazy refusal to do so.
It's not the end of the world.
Except it is, and in order to save himself and his family and friends, Shaun has to grow up fast, be a man, and finally take some responsibility. To varying degrees of success.
Fuck off. You fuck off!
Hot Fuzz spins things a little differently. Nicholas Angel is a policeman.
Officer.
Right, Nicholas Angel is a police officer with a right royal stick up his arse, who's exiled to the quaint and quiet town of Sanford.
That's not true.
No, it's not. It's actually run by a death cult of elderly townfolk obsessed with killing people for the greater good.
How can this be for the greater good? The greater good. Shut it!
So Angel has to dumb down, embrace his inner action hero and become a gun-toting, scenery-chewing, one-liner spitting action hero.
You're off the fucking chain!
And last, but certainly not least, we have The World's End.
Ever had one of those nights that starts out like any other but ends up being the best night of your life?
Gary King's on a quest to relive his glory days by returning home with his school friends to conquer the Golden Mile, a pub crawl they failed as kids.
Don't be so judgmental. Oh, for fuck.
And along that beer-soaked journey, he's forced to quite literally confront his past and an army of robots that aren't robots, in order to work through his traumas and learn to finally move on.
Rather fitting.
How's that?
Now on the surface, these might all seem like retreads of similar story threads and character arcs. How can this make for a great trilogy? It'd be like watching A New Hope followed immediately by The Force Awakens. Same film, different skin. But if you remember what I said before...
Just saying things aren't always as simple as they look.
Because I have irrefutable evidence that each film is a different Matrix-style simulation that Simon Pegg has to go through as some form of futuristic therapy to get him to grow up. And they are therefore all following one linear story.
That wasn't true. Made it up. Shouldn't have done.
But in all seriousness, this is a trilogy that, while it doesn't tell one narrative story, it does progress a thematic story. For me, the Cornetto Trilogy is an exploration of not just the need to grow up, but also how we grow up and the different people who influence our lives.
I don't know if that's true, Gary.
Well, stick with me and we'll run through it. So,
Which one do you want to watch first?
well, Shaun of the Dead, obviously you wouldn't start watching Lord of the Rings with Return of the King, would you?
Yeah, totally.
I like to think of Shaun of the Dead as the childhood stage of the Cornetto Trilogy. That point in your life when your family start expecting you to act a bit more grown up, but you still want to be a kid. And that's who this film takes aim at in its exploration of growing up. Family. Or more specifically, parents.
Hello, Pickle.
Hi, Mum.
Arguably the biggest push for Shaun to finally grow up in the film comes from Barbara and Philip.
Sorry, Philip.
While his girlfriend Liz is telling him to grow up, it's the death of his stepdad and his mum that have the most profound effect on him. Through Philip's death, he recontextualises what he saw as a fraught childhood and sees that he was just trying to be a good role model for him.
Being a father is not easy. I always thought you had it in you to do well, and you just need motivation, somebody to look up to, and I thought it could be me.
And when Barbara dies, it forces him to take charge of his own life without the safety net of his mum to fall back on.
I didn't want to say anything. I thought you'd be upset.
No!
You might think I'm wrong here, and that Liz is the driving force behind all the change in Shaun's life. After all, rekindling their relationship does see him clean up his act, or more accurately, his living room, in a suggestion of his maturity. But
Actually, I might pop into the garden for a bit.
Go on then.
2 seconds.
if she was the primary reason, she'd arguably be able to deter him from spending time in the self-destructive cycle of keeping his zombified friend Ed around.
How's that for a slice of fried gold?
Yeah, boy!
Speaking of friends,
My, here come the Fuzz.
I see Hot Fuzz as the kind of angsty teenage phase everyone goes through. It's loud, it's violent, and altogether it's very messy.
I reckon he's got some there now.
He says he reckons you got some in there.
But more importantly, it takes a look at the impact of our friends on who we are as we grow up, as Angel and Butterman both learn from each other and grow up in very, very different ways.
You are pulling my leg.
Butterman has to grow up and give up on his childhood and pop culture fueled view of what police officers do.
With the power of Grayskull.
And Butterman shows Angel that it's okay to lighten up every once in a while and care about more things than just your job.
By the power of Grayskull.
This is probably the moment when you're thinking,
I think you're talking load of shit.
because if this is all about growing up, why is Angel already a ridiculously mature and focused person? How does that fit into this three-part story of growing up and becoming more mature?
Actually,
He too has to let go of his childhood view of what being a police officer means.
It all started with my Uncle Derek. He was a sergeant in the Met. He bought me a police pedal car when I was 5. I rode round in it every second I was awake, arresting kids twice my size for littering and spitting. I got beaten up a lot when I was young, but it didn't stop me.
His lack of friends as a kid meant that he was unable to mature into a socially adept adult. Without the influence of his peers, he doesn't become a well-rounded person.
Now who's being childish?
And it's only when he finds friendship in Butterman that he actually matures. And that, right there, is growth. So how do you like them apples?
he said you were good.
And with that,
I'm afraid the end is nigh.
What? The world's end!
yes, the world's end, the concluding chapter in this ever-maturing trilogy. And fittingly, it's the most mature of the Cornetto trilogy and takes an introspective look at the series itself, because it's at the stage of growing up where we don't learn from others, but we learn from ourselves and our own mistakes.
This is a bit grown up, isn't it?
That might sound a little lofty, but go with me on this. Rather than learning from friends and loved ones, Gary, in confronting his past, propels himself to his own violent catharsis and learns from his own mistakes.
Old habits die hard.
In that final pub, he hits rock bottom and lets out all of his trauma for the first time.
That was supposed to be the beginning of my life. All that promise and fucking optimism. That feeling like we could take on the whole universe. It was a big lie.
Because what he knows but can't quite accept is that,
Bottling up past trauma can lead to inadequate coping strategies in later life, apparently.
and by no longer bottling up that trauma, he can find the strength to cope in far healthier ways. So when he's presented with the chance to be young again, something that he seemingly wanted for the entire film, he says,
Oh my God. I'm so cute.
well, yeah, he does, but then he says,
Nah.
now that he's reached the end of the world, he's realised it's time to grow up. He has to grow up. And as he stares at all the destruction he's caused, in the same spot he was in all those years ago, he apologises to his friends.
I'm sorry.
He does perhaps the most mature thing anyone can do. He admits that he was wrong. And it's not just Gary that's getting introspective. The film does too. The only thing more ubiquitous to the Cornetto Trilogy than Simon Pegg and Nick Frost is, well, can you guess it?
I don't know. Pub?
Yep, The Pub. And The World's End is the first film that interrogates the drinking culture that permeates suburban Britain and takes a look at the dangers of it. Gary's alcohol addiction is born out of the refusal to grow up and stop drinking like he's still a teenager. And there's no way that story can continue with as devastating a play as this.
Gary, put the pint down, yeah?
And that's exactly what Gary does. He finally puts the pint down. He finally, once and for all, grows up. Shaun and Sergeant Angel's lives for the most part revert back to how they were before. Very little changes. But for Gary, we know that his life will never go back to the way it was.
And you know what?
It never did.
Gary not only grows up, he becomes a father to the blanks.
Children cut off from their parents, abandoned, forgotten, looking for guidance, for someone to show them the way.
He takes them under his wing and gets the life of adventure he always wanted, without the unhealthy and destructive habits that fueled him in his youth. Gary grows up. The newfound self-respect he gains for himself means that he rejects the chance to be the young version of himself, instead opting to just be himself.
And guess what? I ain't perfect.
And with that, he still has all of his past mistakes that he's learning from and passing on his wisdom to his new band of brothers.
5 waters, please.
And as we all know,
Being a father is not easy. I always thought you had it in you to do well, and you just need motivation, somebody to look up to, and I thought it could be me.
so how is that for a slice of fried gold?
Very entertaining.
Thanks, babe.
And thank you for making it this far into the video. It genuinely means a lot. For those of you that are new to the channel,
Willkommen, bienvenue, welcome.
as you may have noticed, I make frenetically edited, analytical opinion pieces that come supported with the bare minimum amount of evidence to back them up.
I feel like I should say something smart. You don't have to say anything at all.
Basically, I've been chasing the kind of views that I got from my one Marvel scene video, and I won't stop until I do.
It never got better than that night.
If you enjoyed this video, consider giving it a like and leaving a comment, let me know what you thought. And hey, subscribe to the channel is free, so you might as well do it.
Basically, no one else has a better idea, so fuck it.
And if that wasn't enough of a desperate plea for your love and attention, this certainly will be.
Love me, say that you love me. Fool me, you wanna fool me.
Oh, jeez, all that arse licking's left me parched. Until next time, bellends.